From borrowing grain you could never pay back in ancient Mesopotamia to working 14-hour shifts in a factory town where the company owned your paycheck to taking out a mortgage on a house that the bank created money out of thin air to give you. This is why every financial system ever built needs you to struggle for it to survive. And spoiler, it's not a glitch in the code. It's the whole point. But first, let's go back to where it all started, because this story is a lot older than you think. Before coins existed, before paper money, before credit cards or crypto or central banks, humans in ancient Mesopotamia around 3000 BC were already drowning in debt. Sumerian temples tracked what farmers owed them, carved into clay tablets in grain, labor, and livestock. Think about that. Humanity invented debt before it invented cash. We figured out how to make someone owe us something before we even figured out what to pay them with. And if that doesn't tell you everything about how this game was set up from day one, I don't know what will. Because those clay tablets weren't charity records. They were the first balance sheets, and the temples holding them were the first banks. And here's the crazy part. Those ancient debts worked almost exactly the same way modern ones do. A farmer has a bad harvest. He borrows grain from the temple to survive the winter, but he has to pay it back with interest. So next harvest, he gives back more than he took. And if that harvest is bad too, he borrows again, more interest. The debt grows. The farmer works harder. The temple gets richer. Over and over and over again, a loop so efficient it survived 5,000 years, basically unchanged. We just swapped the clay tablets for an app on your phone and the temple for a glass skyscraper in Manhattan. But the math is identical, and the farmer is still farming. But if you think the ancient world was rough, wait until the Middle Ages, because feudalism took the debt trap and gave it a makeover. Serfs weren't technically slaves. Technically, they were free men, free to farm land they didn't own, free to pay taxes on crops they couldn't keep, and free to borrow grain from the Lord during bad harvests at interest. By spring, they owed more than they borrowed. Every bad season dug the hole deeper, and the wildest part? The Lord didn't need chains to keep them there. The math did it for him. When you owe more than you can ever pay back, you don't run. You just work harder, hoping this year is different. Kind of like checking your bank account every Monday morning, hoping the numbers somehow changed over the weekend. They didn't, man. They never do. But at least under feudalism, everyone could see who was in charge. Things got a lot sneakier when the Industrial Revolution hit, because suddenly workers had wages, real money, freedom to spend it wherever they wanted. Progress, baby. Except in the factory towns of 1850s England, companies owned the houses workers lived in, the stores where they bought food, and the currency they were paid in, called scrip, which only worked at company-owned stores. So a worker would earn his weekly scrip, hand it right back to the company for rent and bread, and start the next week at zero, or worse, in the hole. You couldn't even escape to a different economy because the money itself was designed to trap you in one place, like a video game where the developer quietly made sure the exit door is permanently locked. And if you complained, there were 1,000 other workers standing outside the gate, willing to take your spot. And while some people started figuring out the system, others were getting hit by something they couldn't even see. Inflation, the silent tax nobody voted for. Here's how it works. Economies need to grow constantly, or they start breaking down. So central banks create new money to keep things moving. More money chasing the same amount of goods means each dollar you already have quietly buys a little less than it did the year before. The people who feel it hardest are the ones holding cash, which is everyone without assets, which is most people. Meanwhile, the people who already own houses, stocks, and land see those values rise because now there are more dollars chasing the same amount of stuff. So the wealthy get richer just by sitting still, and everyone else runs faster on a treadmill that keeps speeding up. Hydrate or dehydrate, am I right? But here's where it gets really wild, because modern banks don't just charge interest on money they already have. When you take out a loan today, the bank doesn't walk into a vault, pull out a stack of bills, and hand it to you. They literally just type the number into your account. That's it. New money, created from nothing, backed by your promise to repay it. Poof. But here's the insane catch. The bank creates the loan amount, but not the interest. That extra money doesn't exist yet anywhere in the system. The only way it can exist is if someone else goes into debt to create it. So the entire system mathematically requires more debt to be created every single year, just to pay back the debt that already exists. It's like a game of musical chairs. where they quietly removed half the seats before the music even started. Someone is always left standing. The question is just who? Kind of like what happened in 1835 when Andrew Jackson, the toughest, most bullheaded president in American history, declared war on the central bank. He thought it was corrupt, elitist, and only benefiting the wealthy, so he killed it, vetoed the recharter, yanked federal deposits, and basically starved it to death. And in 1835, his gamble paid off. He paid off the entire national debt, the only time in U.S. history that's ever happened. Jackson was absolutely convinced he'd broken the trap. He hadn't, because without the debt engine running, the economy had nothing to run on. 2 years later, the Panic of 1837 hit. Banks collapsed, businesses folded, unemployment exploded, and poor Van Buren, who inherited the whole mess, got all the blame. Jackson rode off into the sunset thinking he'd won. The system just rebooted without him. And while some presidents tried to fight the machine, others tried to tame it, because the Great Depression proved once and for all just how catastrophic it gets when the debt engine stalls completely. Unemployment hit 25%. Banks failed overnight. People lost everything. So Franklin Roosevelt came in and did something radical. He didn't try to eliminate debt, he redistributed the pain. The New Deal poured government money into roads, schools, and jobs, Social Security, the FDIC, unemployment insurance. All of it basically meant that when the musical chairs stopped, the government would drag in a few extra seats. And it worked. For about 40 years, America had the strongest middle class it had ever seen. Then deregulation quietly started pulling those chairs back out through the 1980s and 90s. And here we are again. But while some people were trying to patch the system, others were getting blindsided by the newest version of the oldest trick: student loans. Because here's a beautiful piece of system design. You're 17 years old. You don't fully understand compound interest. Society tells you that you absolutely need a college degree to have any shot at a decent life. The government backs the loans so banks can lend without worrying about risk. So 18 million Americans took on $1.7 trillion in debt for a credential the system told them they needed to participate in the same system that handed them the debt in the first place. And unlike almost every other kind of debt in America, student loans cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. They follow you forever. That's not an accident. That's architecture. Oh, do not cry. And then there's consumer credit, the crown jewel, because credit cards didn't become mainstream in America until the 1970s, right? Around the same time, wages started stagnating. Coincidence? Probably not. Because when wages stop keeping up with the cost of living, people don't riot in the streets. They swipe, they borrow the gap between what they earn and what everything costs. And because minimum payments are carefully engineered to keep balances alive as long as possible, sometimes for decades on a single purchase, every month they stay in debt, the bank collects. A person trapped in credit card debt isn't failing the system. They are the system performing exactly as designed. 5 stars for the debt. Palatable indeed. Now you might be thinking, okay, so what's the solution? Work harder, save more, cut back. And look, personal responsibility matters. But here's the brutal truth. Nobody in a suit on television will ever tell you. Even if every single person made perfect financial decisions starting tomorrow, the structural need for a struggling class wouldn't disappear, because the math doesn't care about your discipline. The system requires someone to hold the debt it needs to function. If everyone paid off their loans tomorrow, the money supply would collapse, banks would fail, the economy would seize up and die. The system doesn't reward everyone winning. It literally cannot. Someone has to be losing for the rest of it to keep moving. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's arithmetic. But here's the part that should actually change how you move through the world. Once you see the machine for what it is, you stop blaming yourself for getting caught in it, and you start making decisions based on how the system actually works, not how you were told it works in school. The people who win in the system understand one thing that most people never learn. Debt isn't inherently bad. It depends entirely on what side of it you're on. Banks use debt to build wealth. The wealthy use debt to buy assets that grow, while inflation quietly erodes everyone else's savings. The trap isn't debt itself. It's using debt to consume instead of to own. Because owning means the treadmill works for you instead of against you. And while modern presidents deal with trillion-dollar deficits, none of this is new. Every civilization that ever rose to power built itself on the backs of people who worked, borrowed, and struggled to keep the engine running. The Sumerians knew it. The feudal lords knew it. The factory owners knew it. The banks know it. The only people who weren't supposed to know it were you, and now you do. But if you think that's the darkest part of this story, wait until you hear about the 10 specific moments governments quietly rewrote the rules to move trillions of dollars upward, policy by policy, law by law, while everyone was looking the other way. One changed a single tax line that handed the top 1% more wealth than some entire countries produce in a year. Another loophole was so good, the politicians who wrote it used it personally. Click this video right here because that one only gets crazier.